Committee members, we are actually on time this morning. It is 11 o'clock and the clerk has advised me we have a quorum, and those members appearing virtually have been sound tested, as well as the witnesses. So with that, I will call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 132 of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses, as I indicated, have been sound tested and are good to go. I also want to remind participants, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. As well, you have the option to participate in the official language of your choice. In the room, use the interpretation on the headset, and please select the interpretation that you will need before the meeting, as well as those appearing virtually. We've went through that to avoid disruptions by choosing the official language that you wish to participate in. Please avoid in the room from touching the microphone boom, as it can lead to sound disruptions, which is harmful to the interpreters. As well, I would remind all those in the room with your devices, please turn any alarms off that may be on, or ringtones, because again, that can cause hearing issues for the interpreters. With that, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June 3rd, 2024, the committee is continuing a study on the advancements in home building technologies. With us this morning for the first hour, I would like to welcome our witnesses, Mr. Jans Jain, President at Atria Development Corporation, Ms. Sabrina Fiorellino, Chief Executive Officer, Faro International, and in the room we have Mr. Ian Arter, President, Chief Executive Officer, Printer Building Consultants. We will begin with Mr. Jain. You have 5 minutes, and I would advise, I will remind you when your 5 minutes is gone, and then if you could wrap up shortly after. So, Mr. Jain, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear in front of you and the honorable members of the House of Commons Subcommittee. I am Hans Jain, President of Atria Development Corporation. My family has been in the building development and property management business for over 45 years. We're focused on building traditionally multifamily residential buildings. We are a fully vertically integrated firm from land acquisition, planning, design, construction, property management, and asset management. Our building design process is fairly vigorous. We look for structural efficiency, design efficiency, efficient floor plates, unit sizes, making the overall project more economical, but also allowing for better designed units that feel better for the people who live there, who call their apartments homes. We also, try to capture both cost savings during the construction process and later on in the building operations, how we run our buildings, the systems. So this is, and because we're long-term holders of the asset, we're very focused on the quality of what we build and the efficiency long-term. As a company, we're also committed to advanced technologies to meet the challenges that we face transitioning into a low-carbon economy, both by building more energy-efficient buildings, reducing environmental impacts of our construction, and creating healthy and accessible environments for our residents. Atria has received the Rick Hansen Foundation Gold Standard Award for accessibility across our building stock. Atria was the first developer in Ontario to incorporate electrochromatic windows, glass in our windows. And so the glass will tint depending on the amount of sunlight, reducing heat gain and glare, and eliminating the need for blinds. It reduces cooling loads up to 20%, this product is both energy efficient, but also provides better living experience. This was a substantial, expense. Each glass has both internet and power, each piece of glass, and it can also be controlled by the tenant living in the apartment. And so, this is something that we like to invest in. Building on this experience, Aether is incorporating geothermal for both heating and cooling in all our buildings, paired with high efficiency Mitsubishi variable refrigerant flow HVAC system, VRF it's called. And so, again, currently we're building 2 towers in Scarborough Town Center called the Town Center Place. This will be the largest geothermal field in Ontario. We've completed that, and there'll be 2 towers, both 38 and 40 stories. And and this continues everything from our appliances, the plumbing fixtures. We also use Smart One technology, which allows residents to control features such as temperature, lighting, security from their mobile app. So again, providing efficiency, technology but also provides comfort and control with the individual homeowner. We're also exploring ways to further reduce carbon footprint and building operations, also material use. And we are in the process of, doing one of the largest mass timber rental buildings located in Oshawa, Ontario. And we'll be purchasing that mass building structure from Element 5, located in St. Thomas, Ontario. Also, the exterior panels will be state-of-the-art, and they'll be manufactured off-site and by Unity Wall, which is again, the latest technology on exterior wall panels. So we think, that there's adaptive reuse of our project, but we're also adding, 9 stories of mass timber structure. Just for context, originally we had designed the structure in concrete and steel traditionally, but given that the weight of concrete and steel is heavy, we could only get 6 stories. But with mass timber, we were able to, which is lighter, move to 9 stories and add additional 70, 80 units to the project. So, it also will speed up the process and the timelines. So I think manufactured solutions with technology, I think, is something that needs to be focused on and adapted. Just to let you know, the strategy of adaptive reuse, where we take old buildings, we completed an 1896 YMCA. We converted into 136 rental units, and we completed another building from 1879 in Peterborough also. So we have a practice where we take old buildings and convert them into residential, and we think that's another aspect of moving development along.
Thank you.
Canada. Huh?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Gent. We've gone over the 5 minutes, so points. You can continue on with your with points you want to raise in answers to questions, which I'm sure you will get. So we'll now move to Ms. Fiorellino. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking this committee for giving me the opportunity to speak. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here, and I commend the hard work that you're collectively doing. My name is Sabrina Fiorellino. I'm the CEO of Faro International, Inc., a volumetric modular building company located in Stony Creek, Ontario. Faro operates a 300,000 square foot manufacturing facility, which is the largest modular manufacturing plant under one roof in Canada. Faro delivers state-of-the-art volumetric modular infrastructure to the healthcare, educational, residential, industrial, and commercial sectors. Europe and Asia have been using modular construction for over 50 years, and this technology has up to 80% market penetration in some countries, where it is often under 3% across North America. To build the modular industry in Canada, we need to begin by addressing three topics: procurement barriers, public perception barriers, and speed barriers. I'll start with procurement. Existing procurement practices are the single biggest barrier to the success of the industry. In Europe, at the inception of the modular industry, the government was the first to adapt the groundbreaking technology through procurement of modular projects. The European modular sector is now booming, and the private sector has widely adopted its use. In Canada, there are very few projects that are procured by governments for modular construction. I was recently at a housing conference where a government official referenced the EV sector by saying all levels of government work collaboratively to financially support the EV sector because, and I quote, "Who would come here and spend tens of millions of dollars to build a factory with no support and no guarantee of orders?" Well, that's exactly what the modular industry has done. Our industry needs government to be more innovative in procurement so that Canadian modular companies can answer current infrastructure challenges such as housing. Doing so will greatly improve the timelines required to emerge from the crisis we currently face. We recommend a modular by default procurement approach. Using this approach will send the signal to the market that governments are serious about seeing innovation and change, and by creating a large pipeline of projects in all sectors, the housing sector will benefit in the long run, and economies of scale for affordable housing will emerge. In addition to modular by default, progressive procurement models that account for deposits, appropriate payment milestones, factory acceptance testing, and more need to be considered. We believe that these progressive procurement models actually make standardization of design less important because they allow modular builders to be involved in the design process from the beginning, and there are many architects and engineers that have over 30 years of experience and are willing to work with others who are newer to the industry. The need for industry support leads me to my next point: public perception. In Canada, there's a negative public perception that modular construction is inferior to traditional construction, a perception that does not exist in Europe or Asia. To educate the public, we believe that governments need to send clear messages to Canadians regarding the benefits of modular, including speed, cost certainty, quality, sustainability, and safety. One way to do so is for government to be the initial adopters of the technology. This will have a domino effect. As more successful projects are delivered, more adoptions will occur in the marketplace, and secondary support industries will evolve, such as in finance, insurance, and surety. Additionally, Canada's modular construction industry should be considered an integral part of the mandates of economic development, job creation, and trade across the country to advance economic growth and innovation. This brings me to my last point: speed. Speed is required to get us out of our current crisis, and modular can answer that call, but not alone. With productivity in global construction industry declining as much as 8%, speed is even more critical. One of the biggest advantages of modular construction is speed, which inherently reduces costs, especially financing costs in today's environment. But with delays occurring outside of the control of modular manufacturers, the benefits of speed can be lost. These delays increase costs, which are ultimately passed on to the customer, and in turn make housing unaffordable. And in an environment where costs are already high, in part due to development charges and other fees, the need to keep costs down and maintain speed is critical. One example of where speed is deteriorated is through codes and regulations. In Europe, where some manufacturers can produce a module every 37 minutes, the building codes are, for the most part, uniform. Canada has varying building codes federally and provincially, as well as additional conditions imposed by municipalities. When improvements are made to create greater consistency, we also need to determine how these standards are applied by inspection agencies uniformly. Other barriers to speed include zoning bylaw amendments, site plan approvals, and building permits, often taking 3 years or more to obtain, where landowners incur additional carrying costs on lands, and overall red tape and complex legislation such as transportation legislation, which makes it difficult to achieve any efficiencies in modular building. But it is only when modular is used to its full potential that we can take true advantage of this new technology, including AI and automation, and we realize all the benefits of modular construction can provide to create greater affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fiorellino, and we'll now move to Mr. Arthur for 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'd like to thank the committee for being able to appear and speak on the advancements in home building technologies. My name is Ian Arthur, and I am the founder of Nidus 3D and Printer Builder Consulting. I oversaw the construction of Canada's first 3D printed homes, as well as the first 2- and 3-story printed structures in North America. Our buildings are strong, resilient, and beautiful, and built to net zero ready standards. Our goal is to transform the build process, and in doing so, dramatically increase the speed of delivery of affordable, beautiful homes. Using a first principles approach, we are stripping away unnecessary complexity and rethinking every aspect of the process of how we build homes. Because, while we need to look at every avenue possible to increase supply, at the heart of our housing crisis is a process issue. We will not be able to subsidize our way out of this crisis. We build homes with hundreds of materials, thousands of components, and tens of thousands of process steps, each step performed by dozens of different laborers working for many different companies. Each part of this drives up costs, timelines, and inefficiencies. The structure of the sector is fragmented and by this very nature conservative and resistant to change. It prevents a whole of building approach and resists the introduction of new methods and technologies, and as a result, it is one of the least technology disrupted sectors on the planet. We are, though, beginning to have an opportunity to change this if we move decisively. Global demand for housing is spurring innovations that have the potential to meaningfully increase supply of housing with rapid, repeatable processes. By using advanced automation and 3D printing, we can cut through the complexity issues, reducing material requirements, labor costs, and most importantly, process steps. I'm starting with 3D printing, although honestly, I'm technology agnostic. I would use any tool that allows me to advance the speed and quality of home delivery. 3D printing, though, is the first technology that I found that fundamentally begins to address this process complexity issue. And we must act soon. Canada is already behind in development and implementation of new building technologies. We are lagging the US, Europe, and Asia, and it gets worse every single day. We are slow to look at disruptive technologies, and we tend to have a wait-and-see attitude until it's proven out elsewhere before attempting it here. There is a near infinite amount of support for small-scale pilots in Canada. We love them. They're great headlines. They're fairly easy to pull off. But what we are missing to meaningfully move the needle on housing supply is helping companies scale production to the level that will actually increase supply of housing in Canada. Exacerbating this issue and is the political desire for solutions that fit into election cycles. The crisis is incredibly complex and has millions of moving parts. And what we need from government is consistent policy that extends from mandate to mandate, from party to party, and allows us to bring in new technologies that are complex, expensive, and hard to deliver initially, although have a huge amount of promise in the long run. I will say that an example of this is a near singular focus on modular, and while I do believe it has a role to play in the future of housing, we need to not put all our eggs in one basket. We need to apply best fit technologies for where they're best used. And I think that 3D printing, modular, other forms of robotic automated construction are all part of that solution. I will briefly address two of the common points of resistance that are often brought forward when automation and 3D printing is brought up, particularly in the realm of housing. One is the potential loss of jobs that is commonly associated with automation. While automation construction will disrupt the sector, it will continue to grow as a key employment industry. The scarcity of skilled labor and the demand for housing underpin the need to aggressively recruit into this sector. The tools may change. We used to dig holes with shovels, and now we use excavators. A 3D printer is honestly just a bigger tool. It still needs incredibly smart, skilled operators to run it. I do believe that the jobs will change, and I believe the introduction of new building technologies is actually a wonderful opportunity to recruit new people into the skilled trades and convince a new generation of youth that this is a fantastic career path that they can pursue. The other one I will briefly address while I have time is because I use concrete as my building material of choice, the embodied carbon of the material itself. And I would urge the members to understand the need to separate the technology from the product that is actually being extruded. We need to decarbonize the concrete sector. It's one of the worst polluters on the planet, and there are incredibly smart people working on this, and I am working with companies from across Canada and around the world to deliver materials that are significantly lower in terms of embodied carbon, and there is a path to carbon neutrality. The process, though, of using 3D printing to construct housing should and can be agnostic from the material that goes into it. With that, I'll conclude my remarks, and I look forward to questions from the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur. We will begin with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. That was great stuff and very interesting. And we've heard a lot about new technologies, and it's an amazing thing. We've heard about 3D printing. We've heard a lot about modular. I've had the opportunity myself to actually visit some of these factories, and it's amazing. I'd like to start with Faro International, though. Ms. Fiorellino, you spoke about the biggest delays. I couldn't agree more with you that we need to ramp up and scale up the development, and you could really increase production in your facility, I'm sure. But you mentioned specifically codes and regulations and zoning bylaws and the development approvals process. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more to the cost of the delays. Like you could build a lot more homes, but you don't have a place to put them. That's a big issue. How much could you reduce the cost of every unit, for example, if the development approvals process that includes huge fees like development charges were reduced? What are those costs? What's the impact on the cost of every unit?
So if you take our square footage cost and then add development charges, fees, the cost of land, etc., our costs end up being less than a third of the overall cost ultimately. And so the longer the process draws out, the more the rest of the ancillary fees accumulate. And then it also slows down production in our plant. So I can give you an example, and probably not proud of this, but we built a outpatient clinic for Western Canada. We finished the entire building at the request of the health authority, and it sat in our plant with no building permit for months. And ultimately, the building permit issue got resolved. The building was delivered in 5 days, craned off the trucks in 1 day, and operational very soon after that. And so delays naturally add costs. Now, end customers incurring additional storage fees, additional fees for the general contractor who's waiting, so they're asking for standby fees. And so you can see how costs balloon in every instance, whether it's housing or healthcare or other infrastructure, when things slow down at the permitting level.
Okay, thank you for that. And further to that then, and when you mention code and regulations, I'm sure you're referring to the National Building Code and its implications on provincial codes. Is there any evidence to you that indicates that the National Building Code takes affordability into consideration?
So probably not my area of expertise, but I think the streamlining of codes can assist with affordability. When there is a lot of work being done, and I commend the work to make some of the codes more uniform across from federal to provincial to municipal. What we are seeing, though, is when code changes occur, then the bodies at the municipalities, the inspectors or the approving bodies at the municipalities, don't know how to implement the code changes. So the very issue that these the changes to make the codes more uniform are trying to get at are actually slowing down the process, because then they're not being implemented quickly enough. And so I think that needs to be considered when we're looking at codes overall.
And time is money, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Arthur, I'd like to move on to you. You made a statement, we cannot subsidize our way out of what is effectively a process issue. I'm going to give you a minute to elaborate on that and how you think we might, what the issue with process is. I think the technology you're talking about is amazing. What's the issue with process, and what are the cost implications?
You have an incredibly complex process that is very hard to sequence. And just dozens upon dozens, like I said, of different types of laborers working for different companies that all have to show up on site. And anyone who's in the development industry knows the difficulty associated with when one subtrade doesn't show up for a day, or they're a day late and they're behind on another job, and the ripple effects this has. And this does actually translate as well to your previous question in terms of municipal inspections and the role of building code. If there's a delay from a building code inspector on arriving on site, your site's effectively shut down until they actually arrive. And that's not a particular knock against any individual inspector. They work very hard, but there is absolutely a need to sort of standardize these processes in a way where we can have certainty on the quality of product. We need to build to the highest standards, but where there is not the sort of slowdowns that are associated with that sequencing issue.
So there's a cost related to the thickening of the process over the course of years, is what you're saying.
Extremely so. And in terms of not being able to subsidize our way out of this, it's just too big. Add up the total cost of the number of homes, even if we cut the cost of production to a quarter of what it is right now, there isn't enough money in this country to build it.
So on top of the process issues and the delays that are caused by local government and the code issues, governments make a lot of money on housing too. I think you probably understand that better than most because you're in the business. Do you think that eliminating the GST, for example, on the cost of homes is a smart move to get government costs down on homes?
I'll say that's probably not my area of expertise in terms of what are the effective sort of tax reductions that could stimulate housing production, whether it's end use for consumers and reductions in property tax or GST. We have to pull every possible lever we can. And we can't. You
just named a lot of taxes there.
I know I did.
Yeah. So reducing those wouldn't be a bad idea.
Anything we can do to make housing more affordable.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Coteau for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. It's really exciting to hear the different technologies and different approaches people are taking, and there's no question that this is a big challenge for us as Canadians, and the adoption of many different types of technologies will help in the long term. I'll start with Mr. Arthur. It's nice to see you. We served in the Ontario legislature together. It's nice that you're contributing to continuing to build Canada, literally. So thank you for the work you're doing. You mentioned that there are other jurisdictions where there's been faster adoption of 3D printing. You mentioned the United States and parts of Europe. What does that difference look like? Can you talk a little bit about why there's a stark difference between what's happening here in Canada and in the United States, for example?
I think there's a couple of factors at play. I think there's definitely, we're doing work down in Florida right now, and there is definitely a little bit more of a gung-ho attitude down there. I'd say the only place that we've found sort of like that in Canada is probably Alberta, a little bit more of a willingness to take on some risk and try brand new things and prove it out. But I also think that there's a better support ecosystem, and there's a group we're working with down in Florida right now that is working on accessing DARPA funding for a series of projects. And that sort of nimble and highly effective government agency for spurring innovation would be a wonderful thing to see here in Canada. And unfortunately, I don't think any of the institutions we have here are as effective as they are at bringing new technologies to market and then allowing them to scale. I talked about the problem of an endless amount of pilots and not a lot of support for scaling. And I think that's a really big part of that. So the support from government needs to be there for companies to build themselves out to where they do actually move the needle on housing supply.
Yeah. How long does it take you? I know you do a lot of your work in the Kingston area. How long does it take? And I know it depends on the size of home. But if you had the average structure, how long would it take you to build today? So
the last building we printed was 2,600 square feet, single story. We printed it in 4 days. The first building we built took 3 months. We've had an 85% reduction in the speed of construction in 2 years, and that's continuing to accelerate. We'll be able to produce a 1,200 square foot bungalow in one to 2 days.
Yeah, it's incredible. And if the permitting process and all the other interactions with government was removed, how long would it take from start to finish for a person to actually move into the house?
I'll give you our aspirational goal because we finished printing and we still have to have the rest of the trades come on site, but it's break ground to move in 60 days.
Wow. For an 1,800 square feet home.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the work you're doing, and thank you for being here. Mr. Jain? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. How are you?
Good, thank you.
You're from my neck of the woods. Every time I drive to Ottawa, I go right past, I believe, where you're developing at the Scarborough Town Centre. So I've seen the land that's being kind of sectioned off. You haven't started developing yet, correct?
Well, we're excavating, shoring, and we've done the geothermal field for the 2 towers, yes.
And these
so
are,
we should have our cranes up shortly, yes.
And these are rental units, correct?
Correct.
Okay. How many rental units will you actually develop in the area?
Well, currently we're just under 1,600 units, 4 towers.
Wow.
The 2 towers will be 904 units.
Okay, and you talked about, these, geothermal, you talked about I think you called it ceramic windows, the VRF system. All of those systems, does it end up costing the actual end user more money, or eventually do you actually end up saving some money with these technologies that it sounds like reduce the cost of living through energy consumption? Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think there's initial expense of putting geothermal in and the VRF system and your envelope and looking through all what it's available, but at the end of the day, the person living in your unit will see their energy bill, energy consumption go down. So, it's really a long-term play, and so we feel that we're also part of, we take in CMHC financing, and one of their goalposts are energy efficiency, accessibility, and affordability. So, we've kind of moved in that direction and even taken it further. We also feel, we hold the product long term, and you're seeing financial institutions and where that is important in financing. So, how is that building going to perform 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And I think that's something that we take very seriously. Our buildings performing well over time, and there's comfort and also cost savings for our tenants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
5 seconds under. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Is my microphone on or off? Yes? It's on? Okie doke. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Honestly, we're conducting a study on technological advancements in home building, and we previously did a study on the impact of AI on labour. And Mr. Arthur, given that you spoke about labour, I'd like to get a handle on what you said. Apparently, we are behind the 8 ball. We're laggards when it comes to technological advancements in the building sector, and that will, as a result, have an impact on our labour force. But what's on the horizon will enable us to recruit new workers. But current workers, and there have been representatives from their association, say that they are part and parcel of the solution, and that the key issue is labour force training. Now, how can you count on the current workers to bring forward these changes in the construction sector?
Thank you very much for your question. I don't think that what I said and what you're saying is in opposition. I think that the current skilled labor force needs to be a huge part of this, and we have to provide that training. There is a reality, though, that there is a mass amount of retirements happening out of the skilled trades right now, and we are not training new skilled workers fast enough to replace the people that are leaving. And so if we don't convince a new generation to go into the skilled trades, the data says that there is a huge problem at the end of that road. And that scarcity is going to continue to drive up costs of housing for Canadians.
Oui, merci.
Well, thank you for that. Well, we did actually understand each other. It's important sometimes to seek clarification. Sometimes the current workforce appears almost disposable, and that we're focusing on a new generation of workers. But when it comes to the building sector, there is indeed a labour shortage, you're right, but it's not across the board and in each and every sector. Some sectors need more labourers than others, and skilled workers, and some Labor representatives said, yes, we need to count on the labour force of the future, but also those current workers, both in terms of the design of new technologies and as well on their contribution to what's on the horizon. But thank you very much for that clarification. Now, a question of Ms. Fiorellino, if I may. Now, we saw in a press release in February that you received a grant of $3.3 million from the federal government. Is that correct, as part of the work that you're doing? Now, on what basis did you get that grant? Was it out of an existing federal program for grants and contributions? Was it the first time you received such a grant or subsidy? And is that kind of grant useful for you?
Thank you for your question. It was through the FedDev Scale Up program for scaling the business. So before we received the grant, our company was only 7 people. And post receiving the grant, today we're over 80 people. The grant was for increasing our workforce, buying equipment, and training the workforce. And so it was very, very important and impactful for us to scale our business. And to clarify, it was actually an interest-free loan and not a grant.
Merci.
Well, thank you indeed. Now, if I understood correctly, you're a modular building company, and in Montreal, only yesterday or the day before yesterday, I heard that when it comes to modular construction in Quebec, well, there are a number of companies engaged in that, and so when it comes to modular construction, I think it can make the difference. Are there any hurdles, any obstacles apart from municipal permitting? That's not under our jurisdiction, but are there other obstacles federally when it comes to the kind of innovation that you engage in, Ms. Fiorellino, please?
Thank you. I think I'll refer back to my opening remarks. It's very, very expensive to build and maintain very large modular manufacturing plants. And without a pipeline of work from all levels of government, it becomes a challenge to operate these type of businesses long term. And I talked about the single biggest challenge for our colleagues of volumetric modular building companies, at least the ones who I talk to regularly, is the lack of backlog or the lack of procurement in modular, and not just housing, but across all sectors, whether it's industrial, commercial, military procurement, Department of Fisheries as an example, anything you can think of, healthcare, remote communities, any types of procurement that can help build the industry and give them a pipeline of work, I think would be extremely helpful to the industry as a whole.
Madame Zarrillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions for the witness, Arthur, there. Before I do, just want to put on notice that given that flight attendants in Canada, the majority of whom are women, work for an average of 35 hours for free every month because airlines don't pay flight attendants for duties like assisting passengers with boarding, pre-flight safety checks, deplaning, and other delays, resulting in flight attendants spending nearly a full work week every month working for free, even though they are in uniform and taking responsibility for the safety and well-being of their passengers. Canada's biggest airlines make millions of dollars each year on the backs of unpaid labour. Air Canada made $21.8 billion in profits last year, and its CEO's compensation was $12.4 million. Every hour worked should be an hour paid, and if a flight attendant is at work in uniform, performing work duties, they should be getting paid. In the opinion of the committee, the government should support flight attendants by amending the Canadian Labour Code to ensure that all time spent carrying out pre-flight and post-flight duties, completing mandatory training, and otherwise spent at the workplace at the disposal of the employer, including during a flight delay, regardless of if the delay was in the employer's control, is paid at a rate not less than the employee's regular rate of wages for their work, and that the committee report this to the House. And that's been sent out in both official languages on notice, Mr. Chair, and I note that there is a spelling mistake, a typo in the last paragraph, which my office will correct.
It is for notice. It's non-debatable
That's
at
right.
the moment, so you still have 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Arthur, I am so interested in this idea of research and development. So I know that Canada, as one of the OECD countries that gets measured, is #1 in tertiary education. We have a lot of post-secondary educated people, people that took, are educated past high school in this country. But we are ranked number 26 out of 37 in business expenditures on R&D, and ranked number 30 out of 36 in public funding investment in post-secondary. And I think about some of the businesses in my riding and the research and development that's been done by private companies around robotics, quantum computing, all Canadian brain trust, Canadian IP. But what I'm hearing over and over again is that Canada has an immature infrastructure to scale innovation. So I'm interested to hear how we can fix that.
I think that's absolutely true, and I think there's a lot of data that supports the sort of exodus of mid-sized companies to larger markets where there's a better opportunity to grow. And we're looking at the U.S. markets. There's a reason we're down in Florida, not just because it's cold up here in the winter and hard to build and quite nice down there, but because there is such a huge demand and opportunity down there. I think partially we try to be a little bit good at everything, and I don't know if that's the right solution for a country of our size. I think that we need to find the areas where we have expertise and competitive advantage, and we need to fundamentally support the growth of companies operating inside of those sectors.
And how does the federal government do that?
That's your job.
I know. It's a really hard question, but, do we need more funding? Do we need more R&D funding?
I don't know if we necessarily need more R&D funding to come from the public pocket. I think what we need to do is create an ecosystem where companies are rewarded for feeding profits back into R&D. And so whether that's through tax incentives or regulation or however it is done, I think that there is enough action and growth inside a lot of these companies, and they want to put their money back into R&D. They need to make sure that that's allowing them to do that is a priority for the federal government.
And share what your challenges are on scaling up, because you mentioned it's been difficult to scale up.
Yeah, we have a ton of people who want us to build a one-off home, and then we have a whole lot of people who would like us to take on 1,000 home development. And it's been very difficult for us to find developers to work with at the 20 home scale and the 40 home scale, which are not things that are, or sizes of development that are particularly common in Canada. We do have a lot of mass developers. Some of them have some small sort of new tech wings that will occasionally support stuff, but it's been very difficult to find it. And so if we're looking towards some potential government support, working with developers to do that kind of scale where sort of small startups like the ones I'm involved with can come in and get just over that hump from that one-off project on the way to doing those 500 and 1,000 home developments.
Last question, because I don't have a lot of time, but I know you're very interested in, you talked about the concrete and the decarbonization of these kind of building products.
Yep.
I'm thinking about remote and rural communities north that are not able to take advantage of some of this stuff. What are your thoughts on how we fight climate change and make sure that we have adequate housing for people in the north and rural communities?
The technology I use is decentralized by its very nature. We can pack it into shipping containers and bring it almost anywhere. And so for remote and northern communities, there's huge potential of this to ship in stable, storable building materials, can be there all year long, produced during the short building seasons that we have in those remote communities. There's incredible potential for this technology there.
Zarilla, Ms. Gray, 4 or 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. And just before I begin, I just want to say that based on the motion that the NDP member, Ms. Zarilla, put forth, I'm really glad to hear that she's supporting a conservative bill from last June called Fairness for Flight Attendants Act by MP Leanne Rood, and Conservatives Take Action. So it's really glad to hear that the NDP member is supporting our conservative legislation. I'll now move on to questioning. So my first questions are for Hans Jane. And my question for you is, you wrote an op-ed for Toronto Star last year entitled, Creating of Affordable Rental Properties Requiring Better Financing. And in it, you wrote that, quote, developers are challenged by the low predictability of outcomes when applying under CMHC's funding initiatives, unquote, and that the CMHC policies are, quote, inconsistent with the norms of real estate financing, unquote. And so at a time when building starts are actually down and innovation in home building is required, do you believe red tape and bureaucracy from the Federal Housing Agency are making it harder for builders like yourself to build affordable homes?
First of all, I would say that without CMHC financing, it'd be very difficult in this market to build anything. So we have used on 3 of our projects, we have close to just under $300 million of CMHC financing in place. It is challenging because the time it takes. I feel that in recently that the time has of getting approval has improved. I think the staffing issues that were maybe challenges have improved. But I would say to you, building purpose-built rental, meeting the accessibility, affordability, and environmental, point scores. You need to have a partner that is agile, that can be quick, and it's challenging. And sometimes you're not sure what the assessment, of the loan amount that we were seeking, and so that uncertainty has problems in in your development timelines and horizons.
Well, thank you. And actually, we had heard from other witnesses at this committee as well saying something very similar, where, for example, there's requirements above standard building codes, as you've just mentioned, and then also with the timeline delays from CMHC, and in fact that it's adding to their costs. And so would you agree that that those 2 factors do add to your costs as well?
They do. I would just say on above the building code specifications, we are committed to that. We feel, on a personal note, that is a good thing, but it does add significant costs. And by doing affordable and other things, you're having to figure out the financial model that is not market, and so. But now the advantage of CMHC is the lower interest rate. And maybe the slightly higher loan to value on the mortgage amount. So I'm in agreement with what you've said.
Thank you. And we heard other testimony from witnesses that sort of had come up with a dollar figure. Do you have any idea per unit how much some of those extra costs might add per unit? Or per project,
I'm sorry, I don't. I mean, it's millions of dollars. I mean, we're doing a geothermal field right now that would be, $7-8 million. Then our VRF system, and so our mechanical is more. We're doing, accessibility. There's cost everywhere involved, but also, through the design process, it's more complicated. But definitely timing is the biggest issue, and the uncertainty of the loan amount. And, I mean, those are things that affect.
Thank you. I'm down to my last about 15 seconds here. So I just wanted to ask, the federal Liberal finance minister in June claimed her capital gains tax hike would build more housing. Do you think hiking the capital gains tax will build more housing?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. 10 seconds early. Thank you. Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all the witnesses. I'll start with Ms. Fiorellino. Ms. Fiorellino, I'd like to pick up on where you left off with the guarantee of orders and the commitment of all levels of government to invest in modular and in order to drive innovation. And I look at our rapid housing initiative, which was born out of the pandemic, and you referenced procurement, and the procurement process for RHI required that nonprofits and municipalities build those units within a 12 to 18-month time frame. And through 3 rounds of that program, I think we're up to almost 16,000 units, the majority of which are modular. And so I see that almost as the only program in the country. I can't think of another provincial program, but it's almost the only program in the country that's invested money into the modular industry through municipalities and nonprofits. And can you provide recommendations to us here at the committee that kind of speak to that issue in terms of a guarantee of orders, driving innovation, and driving the purchase of modular units through your business and others?
Absolutely. I think the more procurement in general, even outside of housing, the better for the modular industry as a whole. When the Rapid Housing Initiative came out, Farrell was at its infancy, and so weren't able to obviously bid on that. I think some of our other witnesses referenced we don't need pilots. We need big procurement projects to prime the pump. I mentioned Farrell has 300,000 square feet of manufacturing space. We can build, hundreds of thousands of square feet of infrastructure year over year. And so my recommendation is when every level of government looks at procurement, they look at it from a modular by default lens and say, why not modular versus why modular? We have a lot of builders across the country, especially some of our larger infrastructure builders that are full for the next 5 years and have no more capacity to build. And so we need to look at alternatives. And you mentioned something about scale and technology. And so you can only really look at the real benefits of the scale of the technology at full scale. So we have automation equipment. We use AI in our processes. But if we're not operating our plant at full capacity, we don't also get the full benefit of that, which is more speed and then obviously more affordability. I would argue today we have more of a affordability crisis in housing than a supply crisis, because we can build, we just can't build at a cost that's feasible for people to buy. And so the more work we get, the more we can drive costs down.
Thanks for that answer. I'll follow that up with the market penetration issue that you raised. And I'll point to the Housing Accelerator Fund that sort of created some healthy tension with municipalities to change the way that they do business from a planning perspective. That program has driven many municipalities to adopt secondary dwelling unit policies that allow a unit in the backyard. And I would see that as an opportunity for the modular sector to sell to the average individual. You've mentioned the challenges that exist as it relates to just governments making investments in modular. How do we bridge the gap with the average person who sees that their municipality has allowed secondary dwellings in the rear yard, and they want to purchase a modular unit but aren't sure about how to go about that? How do we assist the industry, your business, and others with growing the business and expanding the market penetration issue that you referenced in your opening?
Yeah, so again, I go back to my opening remarks, and there is a public perception issue as it relates to modular, and also some new building technologies, other new building technologies. And so I think there's a number of things that can be done. I talked about, government being first adopters of the technology, like what happened in Europe, and then public comes along. But I think there's also an ability to provide incentives for homeowners to choose modular or new technologies over more traditional. One of the topics that came up was decarbonization and our targets by 2050. Modular specifically designed for deconstruction, and so I think it's one of the only building technologies that can get to even a net positive place rather than traditional. And I think we need to look at the incentives. We need to look at promoting modular so that the average person considers it as an alternative to traditional.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Right on time. Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et 30.
Merci.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Chabot. My question is for Mr. Arthur. We've also heard from one of our witnesses that we were lagging behind Europe and governments elsewhere when it comes to innovation in the building sector. Could you elaborate on that and tell us how we could make improvements and emulate other jurisdictions that promote the emergence of new technologies in the building sector?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll pick up on the point of the last witness about priming the pipeline. And actually, this goes back to MP Zarillo's question as well. If you want to put a multiplier on government funding, provide it to companies doing innovation that are actively seeking private sector investment. And you will have a 5x, 6x, 10x multiplier on that investment very, very quickly, because the assurity of work that the government can provide to these companies is incredibly meaningful for security for private sector investment. So if we look to Europe and the example of how they embraced modular housing technology and advanced that, and then that gave the private sector confidence to go in and follow in that space, I think that's incredibly important, and I think we can do the same with multiple technologies here.
Another question. How will providing those grants help us to achieve our goals, i.e. the construction of affordable housing units? And that is part of this, isn't it?
Pick the companies well that you're providing support to. Make sure that they have a feasible path to production and to scaling and to meaningfully providing housing, increasing supply or lowering the cost of production.
So it's the whole theory of supply and demand, and yet demand is higher now in terms of affordable and social housing, isn't it?
It is, and this is where we run into the process problem, which is where I started my comments. We're trying to solve a solution with mechanisms that honestly are 100 years old.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Madame Zarillo for 2.5 to conclude this first hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a question for witness Fiorellino. Just around the scaling and the scaling up. How can the federal government create an environment where companies like yours can scale up and can be sure to be fully optimized?
Thank you for your question. I think that the interest-free loan program that FedDev issued. It's very helpful. Like our previous witness said, we had to provide private sector funding alongside government funding, so 60% more private sector funding, with a plan and with metrics and testing to ensure that we are meeting the plan. Otherwise, funding could be scaled back. And so that was very important. Also, having orders, and I go back to priming the pump again, it's not just about scaling the plant. We can build big, beautiful plants and hire a lot of employees, but without work, none of it matters. And so our targets for funding also related to how many orders we could put through the plant, or scaling of revenue in addition to scaling of labor force.
Question on that. Has your organization or anyone in the industry that you've spoken with ever been approached by the federal government to talk about innovation around how the government could invest in or make or buy these kind of housing units?
We've spoken to all levels of government, and I commend the work of all levels of government about a number of things, including are robotics, automation, and AI helpful? Would funds for that be helpful? How can we change procurement on to ensure that the modular industry has a fair shot at different types of procurement? And so I've had conversations with lots of different government officials across all levels, and grateful for those.
And just on trade shows, and I could ask Witness Arthur as well, trade shows. Does Canada host any innovation trade shows around home building, and where do you go across the globe to trade shows?
Thank you for that. So we go to a number of different conferences. We obviously serve a lot of different end sectors, and so a lot of them are private conferences. We attend, for example, the Canadian Healthcare Engineering Society conferences, where engineers who service the healthcare industry attend. We have attended Discovery X, that's hosted by the Ontario Centre of Innovation. We have attended the World Business Forum in New York on leadership. We attend the Modular Building Institute conference that has a Canadian chapter, usually hosted in the US, that has modular building companies across North America and globally attend. So lots of different trade shows. I would say less put on by government and more put on by the private sector.
Thank you, Madame
And Mr. Chair, I wonder if
well
Mr. Arthur could just submit in writing.
If you could submit in writing trade shows that you attend, Mr. Arthur, that would be good, to the committee clerk. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony on this important study the committee is doing. You can leave at your leisure, while we'll suspend for a few minutes while we transition to the next hour with the two witnesses. So again, we'll suspend for 4 minutes. Suspend. second hour of today's meeting. And joining us for this hour are two witnesses, and both are present in the room. We have Ms. Carol Phillips, architect partner with Moriyama Teshimiya Architects. I'll get you to pronounce it correctly when you go. As well as Mr. David Mose, principal engineer with Mose Structural Engineers Incorporated. You each have 5 minutes. We'll begin with Ms. Phillips for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Carol Phillips. I'm a partner at Moriyama Teshimiya Architects. Our work centers on designs that celebrate community identity, embrace sustainability, and create pride in our built environment. For the past 7 years of my 30-year career, I have been embedded in realizing large-scale projects that prioritize mass timber construction, net zero carbon emissions, and leverage the potential of prefabricated building components. These include a 10-story college at Toronto's waterfront, a commercial headquarters building on a ravine, and these have led to an 11-story rental housing project proposed on top of an abandoned federal post office and modular elementary school projects, among others. These advanced technologies, of which there are many, I would like to particularly focus on mass timber and how it can play a role as Canada addresses its housing shortage while also supporting our environmental, economic, and social goals. Mass timber is an engineered wood product that offers a structural alternative to work in concert with concrete and steel. It is manufactured by laminating standard lumber pieces into massive beams, columns, floor, and wall panels. First emerging in Europe in the 1990s, the technology has been in use there pervasively for 25 years. It is durable, lightweight, and crucially, it stores carbon rather than emitting it, making it an effective way to reduce the environmental footprint of new buildings. Canada already has a growing capacity to produce mass timber using locally sourced wood from provinces like British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario, positioning us to be a global leader as demand grows and embodied carbon reduction in our materials is required. This industry is uniquely suited to Canada, which is 40% forests. 90% of our forests are on Crown lands, managed and regulated provincially and by territorial governments. These forests, as the fires demonstrate, need management, while industry needs supply. There is an opportunity, then, for a mutually sustainable human-nature relationship. In mass timber buildings, architects and engineers work collaboratively with builders and manufacturers, leveraging the potential of digital technologies for direct communication between design and fabrication software to produce building components that literally click together. Mass timber is factory-produced and accurate within a millimeter of tolerance. Its lightness makes it an ideal candidate to intensify by adding to existing buildings, and for quality control, its kit of parts approach allows for rapid deployment and risk reduction. It's a natural for the 6 to 18-story residential building scale, which is the missing part of many urban centers and one that suits many growing communities. And it's beautiful, renewable. And just as our trees are not the same across Canada, timber construction allows for the possibility of a regional expression in our diverse nation. To unlock mass timber's full potential, we need to address some things. Procurement practices in public buildings. The design, bid, build approach doesn't support the flexibility needed for mass timber projects. Embracing collaborative methods such as construction management streamlines project delivery. Interministerial coordination. Greater collaboration across federal, provincial, and even municipal levels could drive timber adoption. A national multi-level task force could align policies and lead to the necessary standardization that is required to truly scale the industry. Building codes. Shifting from prescriptive to performance-based building codes would allow mass timber to be used more freely, and incentives. To innovate is to do something that you or others have not done before. Governmentally shared incentives such as tax credits, paid premiums for prototypical projects, or grants could accelerate industry innovation by funding manufacturing or growing professional skills. Mass timber construction is a safer, more inclusive and resilient construction industry. Prefabrication leads to safer work environments, opens more accessible job opportunities, including for women, and creates pathways for engagement with Indigenous communities in sustainable forestry and manufacturing. It is faster and quieter, and it means it has less impact on communities while addressing the housing shortage. And finally, mass timber's benefits resonate with a broad spectrum of priorities, providing a pathway to meet climate and environmental goals while supporting Canadian-made industrial solutions that strengthen our economy. It is aligned with job creation, worker safety, social equity, and it is a Canadian solution that is rooted in leadership, notably in Quebec and coast to coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Mr. Mose for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm David Moses, Principal and founder of Moses Structural Engineers in Toronto. As structural engineers, our role is to support architects and builders during design and construction. Our company's focus has been to bring new products and technologies into the market which can provide alternatives to traditional methods of construction in many types of buildings, including single-family homes, apartments, and condominiums. Over the years, we have had the privilege of working with government and industry partners to develop guidelines and training programs for architects, builders, and even other engineers. And we have a demonstrated commitment to the next generation of designers and builders with our cross-Canada student design competition called Timber Fever, which we've run for 10 years now, which is aimed at breaking down barriers between the design consultants and the people who actually build our buildings. So I have 2 points to make today. My first is that it does take a long time in our industry to make changes, especially when it comes to new technologies and getting them into the market. Testing and approvals are required to limit the risk to public safety and also to limit the potential for liability of damages if the technology does not work. Building codes and testing approvals provide us with the reassurance we need, since buildings must work the first time they are built. As a regulated profession, engineers have a duty to hold public welfare paramount, so we prefer known and approved products and systems. However, the building standards do allow engineers to design novel systems, provided that we can demonstrate that they perform safely and meet the foundations of the building code. And to echo my friend, Ms. Phillips, mass timber is actually a very good example to prove that point, although there are others. I actually worked on the first cross-laminated mass timber building in Canada, which was built for the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. And this was before there were any Canadian manufacturers of the product. So the product came from Europe, and we worked closely with European engineers, reviewing their methods of analysis and reviewing the research that they had done for many years. But the regulatory approvals in Canada didn't come until 2020, 10 years after that first building was completed. So regulatory changes are slow and incremental. In 2012, a joint Canada-US standard was released for CLT, cross-laminated timber, and in 2013, a Canadian design guide was created. In 2016, a CSA standard was released. And finally, in 2020, 10 years later, the National Building Code adopted the changes that included cross-laminated timber. So 10 years seems to be the cycle that we are seeing. However, even though that code may take a while, many buildings were built in that period, much in thanks to the government investments in commercial and academic research in that time, as well as the efforts of many companies like our own who were willing to put their time and money into research and development. And once the building code does change, of course, the doors open for many others to adopt these new ideas with less cost and less risk. My second point is that strategic investments by government do work. For example, easy access to research and development funding for manufacturers and consultants does have a direct impact on getting the products to market before the codes change. Demonstration projects do make a difference when the funding comes in a timely manner, because those demonstration projects become inspiration for others, and they become a living example that other people can visit and touch and see for themselves. In addition, interim government policies between code cycles can also speed the adoption of new ideas and new technologies into the market much faster than the codes can. I believe we can also improve speed by starting to pay the engineers who are members of these standards committees who volunteer their time on a part-time basis to actually get them to focus on the matter at hand and bring these changes much faster. Another area that we could consider as well would be to fund design assist activities where suppliers can get their products in front of the decision makers early on in the design process. And finally, although not in my direct area of concern, but a broader concern, which we heard here just a few minutes ago, is for modular building construction, where perhaps we could consider creating a government pool of funding that would guarantee cash flow for modular factories during the construction cycle to help ride the ebbs and flows within their industry and not lose the precious investments in those facilities. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moses. We'll begin with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both the witnesses. I was going to say very quickly, Ms. Phillips, I'm familiar with some of your projects, and they're beautiful. And so it's a treat to meet somebody who's designed something like that. Sorry, Mr. Moses, I'm not familiar with your projects, but I'm sure they're beautiful as well. I want to focus on the challenges that we face approving new technologies. You've both spoken about this. I'm a big fan of mass timber. In my previous life, spent a lot of time with the forestry industry that supports this kind of mass timber stuff. I love it. I think it's great. But Kevin Lee was here speaking very specifically about housing and the challenges related to the Canadian Construction Materials Centre and how slow it is to approve new technologies. So I'll ask you both if you can briefly speak to this. What specific reforms do you think could be introduced to the Canadian Construction Materials Centre to reduce the time and cost required for new technologies to be recognized as acceptable code solutions while maintaining safety and quality standards? I'll start with you, Ms. Phillips, if you could give me your top 2 things you'd change.
Yes, I mentioned it in my opening statement that I think that in the building code, one of the things that I think that could be focused on is performance-based codes rather than prescriptive codes. So, for instance, at a certain scale of building, you fall into either combustible or non-combustible construction, which immediately kind of precludes you from considering mass timber, and you have to climb a bit of a hill in order to actually prove that you are as good, if not safer, than concrete. Whereas if you were able to just demonstrate off from the beginning the safety criteria, the fire resistance, the durability, and the concerns of the building code, which is the concerns that at heart, the performance criteria, then that actually shifts the conversation and does not actually delay the process in having to prove what against something that you are not, but rather prove what you are. And I think that that is actually a fundamental shift in how we evaluate buildings.
I'd just like to jump in very quickly. You made that point. Can you give me an example where you've had to prove, like based on the compostability of a building, you've had to prove the efficacy of mass timber once and then had to do it again and again and again?
Certainly.
So once you've proven it, it should be proven, I would assume.
Sure. So, for instance, for the 10-story building in waterfront Toronto, and David actually participated in that because the City of Toronto required us to required our client, George Brown College, to hire a second set of engineers, a second set of structural engineers and a second set of building code engineers to validate our team's design.
It's a peer review process.
Peer review process. And it made very clear to us that the findings of that process would not be transferable. So it was unique to the building solution and could not be then transferred to another project.
Professional engineers and architects must find that insulting. Either you're a professional or you're not, I would think, right? Being peer-reviewed by other professionals?
Well, I don't think so.
Overdone.
I think it's a very friendly and collaborative space. We're all in the space of innovating, so we share openly, or we share our discoveries and our failures very, very openly with each other. We want each other's buildings to be successful. Although we are in a competitive industry, we don't keep our cards that close to our chest. We actually really want everything to succeed, right? Because it's better for the industry. So we are, on a separate point, not to your question, but a separate point that David mentioned is the investment that private industry puts in. We have been sharing knowledge and educating others significantly out of our own pockets in order to actually share that knowledge. But the lack of transferability, case to case, is actually something that impedes some of the uptake.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Moses?
It's about some of that. The peer review process is very valuable, and it actually, I believe, actually assists the municipalities because they don't have to have that know-how in-house. They can rely on an external source with expertise. So in a sense, we become another gatekeeper for the regulatory authorities in this sense. I think we can also, in your question specifically to CCMC, which is more of a products approvals agency, we do see that definitely as a barrier to entry into our market because it is a very slow and costly process. I don't have the answer for you on that, but we do know that companies coming in from other countries will typically go to the U.S. first because it's such a bigger market, do their approvals there, and then we can do a lighter version of that with CCMC in Canada because they can. All that investment in research and testing has been completed, so it's just more of a review.
I'd like to focus. We don't have a lot of time, about a minute, but specifically the peer review process. Professionals design something, professionals review it, and all of a sudden, it's not good enough for the regulatory authorities. Can you recommend a process whereby if something's been peer reviewed by multiple professionals, that that should be enough for the regulatory authorities?
When the peer review happens, it's because it is a unique or novel system that is not in the building code currently. So nobody has seen it at that point, in which case it's quite important and valid to have a peer review undertaken. But it is possible, and we've seen this in Quebec when the first 13-story mass timber building was built, that they did actually create a guide that if you repeated that same building, you could follow those instructions and you wouldn't need to go through that process again. So it is possible.
It is possible, but not always done.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I'd just add to that there is an example of that in the States right now about coming up with transferable code examples that are cross-jurisdictional.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, before I begin my questions, I'd like to put forward a motion that I provided notice for on October 22nd. Canadians 65 years of age and older are currently representing 19% of our population, and by 2043, it's estimated to be around 25% of the population. And this represents an increase from approximately 8 million seniors to 11 million seniors. The major demographic shift is always and continues to cause further strain on Canada's social and health services, of which seniors especially rely on as they age. Further, according to CMHC, seniors are increasingly living in their existing homes longer as they age, ultimately contributing to the rise of naturally occurring retirement communities. And I believe the rise of naturally occurring retirement communities, or NORCs as they're known, provide an opportunity for the government to adapt, innovate, and support care delivery systems for seniors that meets both seniors' needs and enables extended aging in place and helps provide early indicators that result in health care cost savings for governments. Now, as an example, the potential savings involved in adapting programs to service NORCs, I'll reference a case study of a NORC-based home care model piloted in Waterloo, Ontario. The NORC Innovation Centre estimated a productivity gain for personal support workers at 44%. In Ontario, if they were to move to a NORC-based home care model and achieved half of the productivity gains of the Waterloo pilot, the organization indicated that it would translate into 755,000 hours or $26.7 million in PSW services for Ontario home care systems annually. And this would allow for more clients to be served within the budget constraints. And with that in mind, I would like to move the following motion. Considering that naturally occurring retirement communities, or NORCs, allow seniors to age well at home with dignity, the committee agrees to undertake a comprehensive study of NORCs. The study would examine the benefits of seniors' health and social well-being and pay particular attention to the cost savings for care delivery. The study will further examine how the government can help address the existing Canadian research gap with respect to NORCs and their impact, support existing NORCs, adapt and or develop programs and strategies to support care delivery to NORCs, and that the communities invite to testify leading subject matter experts, and that the committee reports its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. The motion had the required timeline, but I do not believe you want to pursue debate on this at this time.
Sorry?
Yeah, you moved it, but if we do not want to debate at this time, then it would require a motion to adjourn debate on your motion, so we can return to the witness.
My preference, Mr. Chair, would be that we could deal with this very expeditiously and move on and speak to the witnesses.
Yes, but you did move it, so it's subject to debate, which takes precedent over the witness unless there's a motion to adjourn debate on this motion, so we can return to the witness. Ms. Gray, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know that this was put on notice, and I would like to move a sub-amendment to this notice. And basically, it's, you know, when we saw this go on notice, we had to look up what this was, and it's a very niche. It's very, very niche, and I think that's probably the whole purpose of it. However, to broaden it a little bit more, but to also include this as the priority. So I do have, we can circulate what the amendment would be. So I'd like to move the following amendment, that we add the wording retirement housing options for seniors including in the first sentence. And then at the end of that first sentence, that we would add the words, including how they compare to other options, period. So I'll read what the first sentence would look like, and it's not to remove any of what you have. So it would read, considering that retirement housing options for seniors, including naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs, allow seniors to age well at home and with dignity, the committee agrees to undertake a comprehensive study on NORCs, including how they compare to other options. So I think that it's a very sort of reasonable request, and I would hope that we could easily move forward with that, and it would actually encompass maybe looking at how these fit in on the bigger retirement options. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms.
And we've
Gray.
circulated the.
We have an
amendment.
amendment to Mr. Van Bynen's motion. On the amendment, Madame Chabot, sur l'amendement.
Ben, je peux débattre? Oui.
Oui, on the amendment.
Ben, can I debate? Yes. It is about an amendment avec lequel je suis contre, mais je voulais dire qu'autour earlier, I was against the motion. Yes, it's very specialized. Je ne vois pas en quoi.
I don't see how this study, at least at the HUMA committee, would in any way enrich the work that we're doing. And let me explain myself. This is a highly niche formula, and these NORCs do exist, but the fact of the matter is that seniors who live in residences, whatever kind of residence that may be, whatever name they go by, they fall under provincial areas of jurisdiction. There have been studies conducted on the benefits, the pros and cons of keeping folks at home as long as possible, vis-a-vis putting them in these communities in terms of their health and so on and so forth. So with all due respect, I don't know what that would, where that would take us. There is an amendment, but I would vote against it. I'd vote against the substantive motion.
Any further discussion on the amendment of Ms. Gray?
Y a-t-il
Seeing none, clerk, a recorded vote on the amendment of Ms. Gray to the motion of Mr. Van Bynen.
Mr. Fragascados?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier? Monsieur Cormier? Mr. Collins? Yes. Mr. Cotto? Yes. Mr. Van Bynen? Yes. Mrs. Gray? Yes. Mrs. Falk? Yes. Mr. Gould? Mr. Aitchison?
Yes.
Madame Chabot? No. Ms. Zarrillo? Yes. Yeas pour 9-9, nays
The
contre.
amendment has been carried. We'll now go to the vote on the main motion as amended. Recorded vote.
Mr. Fragascados?
Yes.
Monsieur Cormier? Monsieur Cormier?
Continue.
Mr. Collins? Yes. Mr. Cotto? Yes. Mr. Van Bynen? Yes. Mrs. Gray? Yes. Mrs. Falk? Yes. Monsieur Gourde? Mr. Aitchison?
Yes.
Madame Chabot? No. Ms. Zarrillo? Yes. Yeas pour 9-9, nays contre 1.
The motion has been Mr. Cormier, the vote has been concluded. The main motion has been adopted as amended. We'll return to questioning. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes. Madame Chabot for 6 minutes.
Merci.
Well, thank you very much to our witnesses indeed. Listen, we're finishing up this study. It lasted for about 4 meetings and is ending with your testimony. So here are my questions, and I'd ask each and every one of you to take a stab at them. What would you like our committee to take away when it comes to your testimony and when it comes to drafting our report, which is, of course, based on the evidence you've provided here today? What are the main thrusts of your testimony that you would like us to include in our report? Please, everyone could chime in, please.
Thank you very much for your question. I think that probably the most important thing that I have actually had opportunity to say here today is that intergovernmental alignment, some form of a task force that helps us actually understand where different levels of government can actually help to scale the adoption of these innovative technologies. Certainly we have concentrated today on mass timber, but I think that if there was the possibility of some form of a task force limited in time that could actually look at some of the initiatives that were at various levels of government, and perhaps specifically around the housing issue, we could see where there are unintentional impediments that are put up between the different tiers of government that are actually creating hurdles. And I think that if there's something that I could possibly recommend, it is that to look at a multi-tier task force to actually look at allowing with respect to housing, the uptake of these prefabricated systems. That's one thing that I would say. And the second thing, if I may, has to do with recognizing the upfront investment by private industry, including the professionals who are actually self-educating at this point, really actually trying to scale our knowledge in this continually evolving area. And the self-education is really coming at our own costs.
Mr. Mills?
Thank you for your question. I do think there are some really good things that are happening right now in terms of the availability of funding for parts of the sector. And if I know SR and ED, the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program, I know the consultants weigh heavily on that to help with the self-education that's happening. without that, the process would be much slower. One area that I think, if we were just talking about funding and not a study, but in terms of funding, demonstration funding makes a big difference for developers who are considering using a new technology, because it helps take the edge off the risk, knowing that there's going to be some buffer there that might offset the incremental cost for them. And currently, demonstration funding is just sort of, it's occasional, it's not reliable. And if there was just a permanent pool of money available to allow for these innovations to take place, and it's not, and obviously through a vetting process with certain criteria, but by having that, it makes it more permanent and predictable. Right now, when these funding programs happen, it happens for just a very short period of time, but the life cycle of a building from the time that somebody thinks of the building till it's completed is years. And the current programs just happen, if they happen to be timed correctly for that project, they'll get it. And that's just too much of a risk for most building developers to consider.
Merci, Madame Phillips.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Now, you are an architectural firm, but you talked a lot about using mass timber in construction, and in Quebec it's a major natural resource, wood. We've seen beautiful steel and wooden constructions. Now, you talked about job opportunities in those sectors. Now, given your field, when it comes to employability and workers that are part and parcel of this boom, what role do you see for yourself?
Sorry, I just lost a bit of the translation, but I think that the question had to do with roles and job opportunities throughout the industry. Certainly, I'm an architect, and so but the way we are working now in these innovative fields is that we have to really work more like an ecology. We have to work with the tradespeople. We have to work with the skilled trades. We have to work with the builders. And so, so we don't necessarily, in a way, just see ourselves as just providing the professional services. We actually are part of a much bigger kind of network of individuals who understand the technology. So, so within our practice alone, certainly the skills of being able to use the evaluation software such as LCA analysis, LCCA analysis, life cycle analysis, and life cycle cost analysis helps us speak to our clients and helps them make decisions when it comes to choosing the right materials for their process. Streamlining the process, getting the design right in the first place, involves us working directly with engineers, with builders, and the skilled trades to understand where our designs might have limitations for manufacturing. This is directly to do with actually understanding how we all work together. And certainly, as others have said, there is a major lack in the skilled trades right now. And with automation, with robotics, and with more software-driven manufacturing methodologies, there is room for everyone, including those who don't necessarily have the physical attributes to actually work in the trades in the way that they used to. Yes, thank you.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Ms. Cirillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and my questions are for Witness Phillips, and I'm open to giving you the full 6 minutes here because you talked about an abandoned post office that you worked on, and I want to hear more about this. I want to hear about the learnings and the pros and cons as the government is looking at federal lands, and there is an abandoned post office in Port Moody that is on the initial list of properties to look at for the government. So really, if you could share your wisdom and your learnings so that the government can think about how they can get this done quickly.
So I will say that perhaps the most sustainable building is the building that already exists. If we can adaptively reuse some of our assets and improve upon them, expand them and change their function, that is actually probably the most direct approach to achieving our most sustainable approaches in buildings. While of course we want to innovate and build new, and our standards have obviously changed, when we have quality construction that already exists, If we can adaptively reuse that construction, this is one of the most important things that we should be looking at first, rather than demolishing and filling our landfills with more debris. And so in the case of the project that I'm involved in right now, this is a federal post office that has good bones. It has a steel structure, and because of the use of timber, we are able to add we're able to add to it without improving upon the foundations. There's a little bit of strategic work that needs to be done to reinforce some of those foundations, but it is actually quite limited. So the lightness of timber allows us to actually build on top. And I actually think that this is huge potential. Certainly I am from Toronto, and I can look down main streets that have two-story buildings. And one has to wonder whether or not those can take another 2-4 stories on top of them to intensify our cities so that we have more of a 6 or 8-story fabric all through our main streets rather than having 2-story and then 40-story. I think that there is what I call a missing middle, and the project that I'm working on right now has that potential. I also think that when we take away our built heritage, we take away the history of those communities. We take away the fabric that was there that gave those communities identity. So when we have heritage buildings that actually help to give identity to a community, but because we can't find a way to reuse them, we end up taking them down. We erase something of our history. And certainly in this day, there are parts of our history that we really need to relook at. But I don't think that a post office is necessarily one of those areas that we need to completely rethink. And if it gives character, if it gives history, the people who worked and lived in those communities, there are stories embedded in that community, it gives identity and a sense of pride to communities if you can continue to keep that built heritage and continue to grow upon it while providing needs for others. So we have learned that that by using innovative technologies, such as not only mass timber but prefabricated wall panels, we are able to come in close to heritage buildings and be able to actually adaptively reuse them, have quality control that is built off-site, and then just simply craned into place. In one of the projects that I'm working on in Toronto, a 225,000 square foot building, its entire structure was erected by 7 people and 1 crane at a rate of about 10,000 square feet a week. And that doesn't mean that's reducing jobs, because those jobs have just moved to safer environments. They're now in the factory. They're in not out in the weather, not out in the wind, but you're actually producing things in controlled environments. It speaks to quality and safety, and then a much cleaner and easier erection of the structure. It doesn't plug up the city, and it doesn't act. I'm done. Thank you.
I'm trying to slyly look over there because I want to ask another question. Okay. So thank you so much for that. And, as a sociologist, and I was a city councillor, what is the social side of it? I cannot find any research that talks about the social impacts and the determinants of health in these large towers over 30, 35, 40, and 50 stories. If you have some research around that you could share with this committee, I'd very much appreciate it.
So we can certainly refer to a number of studies, and David, you may know a little bit more about that, but there are a number of studies, some that originate in Finland and others that are in Japan, that speak to a phenomenon called biophilia, where we as human beings actually have positive responses to natural materials. It lowers our stress levels, and there is a study that I've heard of, and I don't know the source, perhaps you can find it. It's done by the Department of Defense in the U.S. And this is a very interesting study because they were looking at stress reduction specifically in the military personnel, which is a huge issue, and looking at mass timber and natural materials in your everyday environment and how it actually helps to reduce levels of stress in your daily occupancy. So these are studies that that perhaps I can help to source, but definitely there are studies out there that speak to wellness that actually contribute to that.
Thank you so much. And Witness Moses, I just wanted to follow up on the easy access to R&D funding. This is something that I think about a lot, is like, what kind of environment are we creating in Canada? So you mentioned about the demonstration projects and just funding. What can the federal government do in that space to drive innovation?
Well, currently the one demonstration project which does come to mind is funded through MNR. So that is federal government funding. So I would definitely look at piggybacking on that because I think they've done a really great job of administering their program right now and being very critical of the projects that are coming through. And I believe it's been oversubscribed. So there is demand for it. But I think that would be a good starting point.
Ms. Falk, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank both of the witnesses for being here. I just wanted to quickly ask a question off the top regarding the building code. I know there's been conversations already in this meeting about the building code, and we've actually heard throughout the duration of this study in different meetings that the code needs to be quicker to adapt to innovations and be an acceptable building code solution, that in some case the gap is resulting in costly over-engineering because the code isn't adapting quick enough. I'm just wondering what government can do to ensure that that there is affordability and cost effectiveness are factored into the building code.
I think that this issue of adopting proofs is an important one because to be quite straightforward about it, oftentimes in order to achieve some of, say, fire ratings, etc., there is no other way to do this but to simply just add more and more material to something in order to you take a combustible item and you wrap it in something that is non-combustible, so you're building something twice. So there is kind of this over-engineering, but it's also just trying to understand if something has been proven, pathways to understanding how we can actually get that adopted into the National Building Code, and perhaps allowing municipalities to reference the National Building Code and not just the provincial building code when they're working on buildings. I think education for building departments is a huge part that can be done. I think governments can actually support building engineers who examine these projects to understand what they are actually taking them on tours to show them the performance. And then in terms of affordability, and this doesn't have to do with the codes and regulations, it has to do with the insurance for these buildings. I think the insurance companies need to understand that these buildings are safe and not apply the kinds of premiums that they are applying to the projects. So affordability for clients to be able to consider these building methodologies without being punitive to them. David, did you have anything to add?
Well, for me, the struggles I see with our clients is more on the development side and the zoning and the local bylaw and dealing with that. And then it's a trickle down from the National Building Code into each of the provinces or territories and their usage of the code, and the local authority who has to then sign off and issue that building permit. So if there's slowness or sluggishness in that process, that I believe is where it's going to come from. I think the mechanisms are probably in the code as we speak, because we've already mentioned a few of these things today, like the alternative solutions or other approaches, but then documenting that and making it accessible to everybody. In the early days of adopting new ideas, we often, once we found a building official who was willing to buy into our idea, we would get them to talk to their peer in another jurisdiction when we tried to build in that jurisdiction. And that peer-to-peer discussion actually made the difference as opposed to top-down.
Mr. Moses, well, you have the mic here. So just picking up on some of your earlier comments about the way government funding programs are structured and how that limits access to them. Can you comment more on how the federal government can encourage investments in innovative building solutions through its programming? Or if you have specific examples of how the current structure or program practices discourage innovative home building?
It's interesting. Thank you for the question. I think we get a lot of companies coming to us with a new idea, and they're ready to ramp up. So maybe they have to struggle to get their funding to ramp up internally. But even when they get to that point, they need to get in front of a potential client. And the way the process is set up currently, if I'm a developer and I want to build something, I will go to what I know, something that I've used every time and been successful with, so I'm not going to change my ways. But if I can get in front of that person at the beginning, when they're making that first choice, then we can design the building around what's available from a factory and say, okay, well, this is their limitation. This is what they can produce. We're going to lay out our building in such a manner, or we're going to look for how the zoning could affect the potential use of that product. Well, that takes time and money, and that's what we call design assist. It's an early phase of design before you even get into the full design where you contemplate what the options are, but there's cost to it, and it's additional cost, so people don't want to do it. So I think that might be a way to look at, well, maybe we can provide some funding for, let's look at some options. Let's bring some potential players to the table and see what could happen there. What do these options look like?
Mr. Coteau for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. We've heard a lot of just different testimony on mass timber and its value from other witnesses as well. And, you know, it's something that I support. I agree with all of the points that are being made. But, you know, when I did research, there are some critics out there that say, you know, the weather can have an impact, natural elements, you know, insects, termites, water, fire, you know. So maybe you can take a moment to, if you feel comfortable, dispelling some of those or debunking some of those criticisms that get applied to mass timber. How valuable is this, and how resilient is the resource when we're actually building structures today? Either person. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys.
I can start. You'll finish. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. We talk about mass timber. It's something we've specialized in, but we see a lot of other products in other, you know, in steel and concrete that are coming forward that are really providing good solutions as well. And now we're looking at combining them all and making these kind of hybrid structures. If we want to talk specifically about the timber, I think we have dispelled a lot of these myths. If you want to talk about fire, we have excellent fire engineering that happens now, which just didn't exist before. But we have existing over 100-year-old buildings. One of my office buildings that we're in is just over 100 years old. And it's all timber, and it's nail laminated timber, which has worked just fine all of these years. But we went away from it, and now it's a renaissance. We're coming back to it. But when they built those, they didn't have the same technologies that we do now. So we talk about encapsulation. We have active fire sprinkler systems and other technologies. So that part of it, I'm comfortable with, and that's where a lot of the research and energy has gone into developing it. In terms of the other items, yes, we are always concerned about moisture during construction, but that's also countered by, well, if it rains during construction until we surround the building and close it in, let's close it in faster. And, well, these prefabricated systems actually address that because the buildings go together so much faster. And I'm sorry, were there other?
No, that's fine. I think it would be good just for that to be in the record of the report, because it's important that it's come a long way over the last few decades to become such a resilient resource. And Ms. Phillips, you talked about it being a Canadian solution, which I think is a great thing. And every province and territory having their own, I guess, approach to it and uniqueness, I think is also a good thing as well. You talked a little bit about the setting up this committee across. So every province, as you know, and territory, they have different codes and different standards. We've heard from witnesses that talked about how even procurement, approval for design, permitting processes, codes, it's all over the place in the country. How would a committee that the committee that you mentioned, this task force, would it be made up of different members throughout all of the provinces and territory, municipalities, different municipalities or representation, the federal government? How do you envision it actually being organized?
Thank you for the question. And I think it could happen at a couple of levels. So in a province, if you just looked at the tiers of government, I think, I can give you an example. For instance, if you picked a sector, right now we're looking, for instance, at a Kit of Parts elementary school. And so the provincial standards for space allotments for that dictate how much space per child is given to a school don't speak directly to exactly what David was talking about, the economically viable manufacturing dimensions. So it comes down to numbers and space, that if you are actually precluding a technology to be advanced because you're embedding inefficiencies in that, because you've given a certain kind of dimension to a room that just doesn't work with the manufacturing in an economic way. If you could just get those conversations happening, so that you can get the manufacturers, you could get the provincial regulations speaking to the municipal. You can understand the federal initiatives as well, and those. So I think it could work within a province, but then I think there needs to be interprovincial dialogue that could really help the different industries across the country, because there are new factories now coming up in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, certainly an embedded industry, a robust industry in Quebec, a robust industry in British Columbia. How do we bridge right across? Because the forest bridges right across the country, and so there is potential for that in that economic engine, and it's renewable. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just less than 2 minutes. Is it the will of the committee? Okay, it's the will of the committee to adjourn. Okay. With that, I want to thank the witnesses. The committee will meet again on Thursday. And thank you, Ms. Phillips, Mr. Moses. I really liked your testimony on old buildings. We seem to have a notion in Canada that it's no good unless you tear it down and build totally new. So yes, thank you for your testimony before the committee today. With that, committee members, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Committee is adjourned.